Hi friends, it's Chari, and today I'm creating a fun gatefold card with a window where you open it up and you see this fun scene inside. First thing I'm going to do is take the Magic Iris Beehive add-on. I've cut the beehive from some sunflower cardstock. This is going to go on the outside of my card. And I've also cut one from some number 2 pencil cardstock, and this is going to layer behind it and be on the inside of my card. I've also cut out the branch and the little leaves, and I'll just set those aside. Now I'm taking my pencil and I'm marking the center of this beehive. This is just so I can line things up well as I create my card. Now for the card base, I'm using pattern paper, and I'm cutting a piece of the yellow spiffy speckles paper to 5.5 by 8.5, so the same as half a sheet of regular letter size paper. And then I'm going to score this at 2 1/8, which is half of 4 1/4, and then the other score line will be at 6 3/8. But the easy thing to do, if you don't want to do the math to figure out where that goes, you can just take your paper and flip it around and score at 2 1/8 again. This will create my gatefold, and those two sides will fold inward. So I'll just fold that in and reinforce those folds with my bone folder. So now I have the base of my card. Now I did want to show you that this is the shutter card die. You could make the same kind of fold with a shutter card die, but the Hive just barely fits on there. So that is why I'm not doing that for this particular card. Now I've lined up my Hive using that pencil line that I created with the center fold there. I've put a little bit of removable adhesive on half of the circle, and then this is the piece that came out of the die cut, so my negative piece, and I'm going to use that as a guide. I've got my 2-inch circle die. This is just slightly larger than the hole that the die creates for the Magic Iris Beehive. So you can see there, you can line it up on the back. Hold that in place with a little bit of tape. I'm going to pop this circle out, although you probably could leave it. And I'm going to run that through my die cut machine with the card open so that it only cuts one side. Then I'm folding my other side in. I'm going to move my tape to the other side. Then I'll open it back up and run this through my die cut machine as well. And this way I have 2 half circles cut on each of the pieces that fold in, and they create one full circle, which my honey hive here is going to lay over. So that's sort of how this is going to work. Now before I assemble these pieces, I want to do some stenciling on the inside of my card. So the idea was to make this look like you open it up and it is the inside of the beehive, which I thought was fun. So I'm using my honeycomb stencil and some lemonade ink. So this is a lighter yellow. And I'm just doing some random honeycomb all over. I'm not completely filling it, but you can easily just shift this over, line it up with parts you've already stenciled, and continue this honeycomb as much as you like. I'm using my Post-it note to help protect the edge there because I did get a little bit of an edge on one of them at the beginning, but I'm going to go over there and kind of add some more ink so it's hidden. And I'm just filling this with some random hexagons or honeycomb all over. So now that I have some good coverage of that lemonade ink, I'm going back in with some sunflower ink, which is a slightly darker yellow, and I'm just adding some darker spots by lining up my stencil in the same places that I had it before, and just adding a little bit more dark ink, and you can see that that kind of varies the look of that background. Now the really fun idea I had was to add the paint splatters to the inside, and I'm using number 2 pencil ink to do this. I thought that this looked like honey splattered all over the inside of the hive, because that was sort of the concept, was when you open this up, you see the inside of the hive. I think this would also be really fun with some gold stencil paste, but I wanted to be sure that this worked and stayed nice and flat, so I did not introduce stencil paste into it, but I think that would be fun to try. And then once I have all of my splatters, I am going to add some actual paint splatters with some gold metallic paint because I always like that little hint of shimmer. And then also to give it a little more dimension, I'm going to use some black watercolor paint just to flick some little black dots all around. I like all this texture that I'm creating on this background. So you can see that little bit of shimmer in the background as well. And then I'm going to do the same thing to my hives. So I added a little bit of the gold splatter, but I'm adding the black because I don't want these to look too perfect. So that is my sunflower one that is going to go on the front. And I'm going to add some gold splatters as well. They're going to be very subtle since I'm flicking it off the side of the block. And then for that interior hive, I wanted to darken it up just a little bit more, so I'm taking that number 2 pencil ink, and this one is cut from the number 2 pencil paper, and you can see how that kind of adds some darkness to the edges, and it also makes those lovely stitching lines show up really well. I'm adding some black splatters to that as well, and I'll set those aside to dry. Now I'm cutting up some blue spiffy speckles paper, and I'm cutting this to be 5.5 by 4.25, just like the size of my card. And then what I'm going to do is mark the center of this with a pencil line. So I'll just pull out my T-square, find the center, and draw a guideline to go by. So I'm going to draw this line at 2 1/8. And then eventually I'm going to cut these apart, and this is going to get layered onto the front of the card like this. But before I do that, I want to cut the same circle. And since I'm leaving this together and I haven't cut it apart yet, I can just layer it behind, line up that same circle die, and cut the circle out of both sides at the same time. Now I can take this to my paper trimmer and cut it right on that pencil line, and I have my 2 front pieces that are going to line up with that circle perfectly. Now I'm not putting the front on just yet. I am going to fold this closed, use the circle that came out of the middle of the hive, and I'm going to stick that in the center with a piece of removable tape. This is just a guide so that I don't stamp anything in this circle so it doesn't show through the window. Now for the images for this set, I used lots of bees from Hive 5, and I'm also using that cute little bear from the For You Dear stamp set. It has a front and a back, and you're going to see how I'm going to layer those together. Now for all my bees, I'm just doing some simple coloring with that Y38 along the bottom and then the Y35 up at the top. And I colored all the bees exactly the same. And I used those same colors to color my honey pot. Now for the wings, I used the BG10, and I didn't do any shading. I just added that really pale blue to all the wings. And then I pulled in some other BGs to color the lid of that honey pot. This honey pot is going to go in the hands of the little bear. And then I'm using some really pale purples for the label, just for a different color to pull into this card. Now for my little bear that is visiting the bees in their hive today, I'm just doing simple coloring with 2 colors. I have the E25 for the darker shade, and then I'm blending it out with an E23. And I will do the same for the front of the bear, coloring the dark color along the bottom of his face and underneath his chin, and then blending out with the lighter. I will add a little bit of pink to the inside of his ears. And then I also went in with an E27 and added a few little dots just for some texture. I'll of course cut all of these out with the coordinating dies, and the die for that little bear will cut the arms so that it can hold the honey pot. Now I've got my card open in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment using Henry's ABCs. And I'm just lining them up and doing a practice stamp. You can see that I have that circle there as my guide to where not to put my letters, because you're going to see that through the opening in the front. And so I have happy, bee day. And I'm just putting a piece of scrap paper in here just to kind of test stamp them once I get my letters lined up. And I'm actually lining my letters up to where they're not straight, which I think was a really fun look. So now that I have them placed where they need to be, I'm just adding some black ink, and I'll just stamp that sentiment right there on that background. There wasn't a dash in this set, so I'm just going to hand draw that in with a black pen. And then there is my finished sentiment. So I've gone through and I've laid out all my little bees and their speech bubbles, kind of where I want them to go inside. And before I glue any of these down, I want to stamp some trails because I know these will go behind some of the images. I'm going to be stamping the trails with some manatee ink, which is a very pale gray ink. So they're going to kind of fade into the background a little bit and not distract from the sentiment or the other bees. So I think it's fine that it overlaps everything. And then I'll just start to add my bees with some liquid glue as I work my way around this interior of the card. I am making sure to not put any of these die cut images over the fold line because I don't want them to get crushed when the card is folded closed. And I will go and add some trails to some of these other bees. I just wanted to start with the trails where I knew a bee needed to be adhered on top of it. So now I can go back in with that narwhal ink and those trail stamps and just add some more. I am going to add this one to where you kind of see it through the opening, which I think is kind of fun. And then of course I like this little bitty one. It is great to stamp in smaller places. And I do like that you can kind of turn them this way and that and get different looks with the loop on the top or the loop on the bottom. And I did feel like I needed a bee in this top right corner, and I had plenty of bees to spare. So I had one to add up there. And then that is the inside of the card kind of finished. Now to work on the outside, I can add my blue pieces that I cut earlier. I did mark with an arrow which way was up so that I made sure I got them in the right spot. And I'm just adding this with liquid glue so that it stays nice and adhered to the card. I'll do the same thing to the other side. And this will help make these two folding pieces a little more sturdy as well, since it's two pieces of paper laminated together. Now I wanted to do the same to the back of the card since I use pattern paper and it is not quite as thick as cardstock. So I'm just going to add a piece of cardstock to the back. This is just cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, just like a normal A2 size card. And I'm just basically layering it on the back just to give the card a little more stability. And you'll have a nice clean back to the card as well. So there is my card all put together, and I can start to add the decoration to the front now. So I'm taking my beehive, this is the sunflower beehive, and I'm putting glue on half of it. And to keep from getting any glue on the inside of my card, I'm just going to open it up and lay it face down to line that up. And the circle that we cut is slightly bigger than the circle in the beehive, but we're going to kind of cover it up and it's not that much bigger, so it's not very obvious. Now you could kind of put this whole thing there, but I liked seeing all the bees, so I'm going to cut mine in half and only use half of this hive for the back side of the beehive. And this is more just a nice way to finish it off so that you don't see the kind of rough backside of your die cut. Now for the branch, I cut this from some brown wood grain cardstock. So I'm just kind of enhancing that wood grain with a little bit of distress ink in some gathered twigs color, just to give it some shadow. And then I'm just going to adhere that to the top of the hive. Now for my little bear, which I just think is the most fun part of this card, his arms cut with a die so he can hold things or hang on to things. So he's hanging out on the inside of the hive and he brought some honey to the birthday party. And then I can layer the back side over that front side and complete the bear that's looking into the hive. Now I'm adding my leaves. I cut these from some Cilantro cardstock as well as Noble Fir cardstock so that I had two colors of green to work with. And now I'm just adding these with a little dot of liquid glue. And then that one leaf to the far right, it overhangs onto the right side panel, so it is not glued down. And I thought a fun way to kind of finish that off would be to glue a leaf on the back side, which you'll see me do in just a moment. I'm taking some of my extra bees to decorate the front of my card. And then here is where I'm going to add a leaf to the back side of this leaf and sandwich that branch in between, and that just kind of finishes off that one leaf you can see from the inside. Now for the trails on the front, I also stamped those with some gray ink, but I die cut those out so that they'll stand out a little bit more on that blue pattern paper. And I'm just adding these with a little bit of liquid glue behind the 3 bees on the front of the card. And then whatever part of the trail hangs off the side, I'll just trim off with my scissors. I like the look of those trails kind of going off the side of the panel. And I also trimmed off the very end of the branch as well. Then I pulled out some gold die cut hearts and added those. It was a nice way to fill in the space above the bear and add some glitter. After I was done, I also added some glitter to the wings of the bees. But here is my finished card, and you get that really fun card with a window, and it opens to kind of a big surprise scene on the inside with all those cute little bees having a fun birthday party. I just really liked the idea of this little bear looking in, and then you open it up and you can see what he sees inside of the hive. So here is another look at that card and then that really fun inside of the card. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.